The thundering hooves of a lone horseman echoed across the drought-stricken plains of Wyoming Territory in 1877, dust billowing behind him like a storm cloud as he pushed his chestnut stallion to its limits. Wade Montgomery had ridden for 17 days straight, stopping only when his horse demanded rest, his weathered face set with determination that not even the merciless summer sun could wither. The promise he'd made 3 years ago burned brighter in his heart than the blistering heat that scorched the land around him. Delia Hawkins stood on the weathered porch of her family's ranch house, squinting at the horizon as she had every day since receiving the telegram that had shattered what little peace she'd managed to find. Her father's land was nearly gone, stolen piece by piece through forged deeds and corrupt officials working for the Eastern Cattle Company that had moved in like a plague. Tomorrow would be the final auction, and without the money Wade had promised to send, the last of the Hawkins legacy would vanish like morning mist. "No use watching for him, Delia," her brother Thomas said, joining her on the porch, his once proud shoulders now permanently stooped with defeat. "It's been 3 years. He's not coming back," he promised Thomas. Her voice remained steady despite the doubt that had crept into her own heart during the long months of silence. Thomas sighed, the sound of a man who had run out of hope. "They all say that. Men like Montgomery don't put down roots. He's probably got a wife in every territory from here to California by now." "You don't know him like I do," Delia replied, though her brother's words stung with the ring of possible truth. Wade had left to seek his fortune in the gold fields after her father refused their marriage, demanding the penniless cowboy prove his worth before taking his daughter's hand. 3 years of waiting, with only occasional letters that had stopped coming 8 months ago. Inside the house, her father coughed violently, the consumption that had taken hold of his lungs growing worse with each passing day. The sound yanked Delia back to her duties. Tomorrow they would lose everything, and no amount of watching the horizon would change that. As the sun began to set, painting the vast Wyoming sky in shades of orange and purple, Delia completed her evening chores. The once thriving ranch had been reduced to a handful of cattle and 3 horses. The hands had all drifted away when the money for wages dried up, leaving just the family to manage what remained. She was hauling water from the well when she heard the distant rhythm of hoofbeats growing steadily louder. Setting down her bucket, she shaded her eyes against the setting sun, hardly daring to hope. A lone rider emerged from the golden haze, pushing his exhausted mount toward the ranch house at a pace that spoke of desperate urgency. Delia's heart lurched in her chest as the rider drew closer. She knew that silhouette, the set of those broad shoulders, the way he sat a horse as though he'd been born in the saddle. Even caked with trail dust and looking half dead from exhaustion, there was no mistaking Wade Montgomery. She stood frozen as he pulled his heaving horse to a stop in the yard. His face was leaner than she remembered, his skin bronzed by years in the sun, new lines etched around his eyes. But those eyes, the same striking blue that had haunted her dreams for 3 years, locked onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Delia," he said, her name a reverent whisper on his cracked lips. Wade dismounted with the stiff movements of a man who'd been riding far too long. His stallion's sides heaved, foam flecking its neck. He took a single step toward her, swaying slightly before catching himself. "They said you'd never come," she said, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heart. A slow smile spread across his weathered face, transforming it into the one she remembered from her dreams. "Then they don't know how far I'd ride." Before she could respond, Wade reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather pouch that clinked heavily as he tossed it to her. Delia caught it reflexively, surprised by its weight. Opening it, she gasped at the gold coins that glinted in the fading light. "I made a promise," he said simply. "Would have been here sooner, but some claim jumpers in Colorado had other ideas. Nearly killed me for what's in that pouch." Delia stared at the fortune in her hands enough to save the ranch and more. Whatever she might have said was cut short as Wade's legs finally gave out. He sank to his knees in the dusty yard, exhaustion claiming its due. Thomas appeared on the porch, rifle in hand, his expression changing from wariness to shock as he recognized the visitor. "Montgomery, is that really you?" "In the flesh," Wade managed, though his voice was fading. "Though not for much longer if I don't get some water and rest." Thomas and Delia hurried to help Wade into the house, supporting his weight between them. Once inside, they eased him into a chair at the kitchen table while Delia fetched water. "You look like you've been through hell," Thomas remarked, eyeing Wade's trail-worn appearance. "Took a few detours through there, sure enough," Wade replied, accepting the water Delia offered and drinking deeply. "But I made it back, just like I promised." "Just in time, too," Delia said, placing the pouch of gold on the table. "The final auction is tomorrow. We're about to lose everything." Wade's expression hardened. "That's not going to happen, not after everything I went through to get here." A harsh cough from the back bedroom interrupted them. "Is that Pa?" Wade asked. Delia nodded, her eyes shadowed with worry. "Consumption. Doctor says he doesn't have long." Wade pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. "I should see him." "He might not recognize you," Thomas warned. "His mind wanders sometimes." "Doesn't matter." "I made him a promise too." Delia led Wade to her father's bedroom, where Samuel Hawkins lay propped against pillows, his once powerful frame now skeletal, his breathing labored. The old man's eyes opened at their entrance, confusion giving way to recognition. "Montgomery," he wheezed. "You came back." Wade approached the bed, standing tall despite his exhaustion. "Yes, sir, I said I would." Samuel's gaze drifted to his daughter, then back to Wade. "You find your fortune, boy," Wade nodded, his expression solemn. "Enough to keep my word, sir. I've come to ask for Delia's hand, same as before, but this time I can provide for her properly." A ghost of a smile crossed the dying man's face. "Stubborn fool, always knew you'd either make good or die trying." His hand trembled as he reached for Wade's. "You have my blessing." "Should have given it 3 years ago." Wade gripped the old man's hand gently. "Thank you, sir." Samuel's eyes closed, the conversation having drained what little strength he had. Delia led Wade back to the kitchen, where Thomas was examining the gold. "This is genuine," Thomas confirmed, looking up at Wade with newfound respect. "How did you come by it?" Wade eased himself back into a chair, fatigue evident in every movement. "Struck a vein in Colorado, small but rich. Worked it for 2 years before some outlaws caught wind of my success. They tried to jump my claim, nearly killed me in the process." He pulled aside his collar to reveal a puckered scar near his shoulder. "Bullet missed my heart by an inch. Is that why your letters stopped coming?" Delia asked quietly. The months of silence suddenly explained. Wade nodded. "Spent 3 months recovering in a mission hospital. By the time I could travel, snow had closed the mountain passes. Had to wait for spring." He reached across the table to take her hand. "Not a day went by that I didn't think of you, Delia." "There's a lot to do before tomorrow," Thomas interrupted, though his tone had softened considerably. "That auction won't stop itself, and Jefferson's men won't take kindly to losing their prize." "Jefferson?" Wade questioned. "Randall Jefferson. Owns the Eastern Cattle Company that's been buying up all the land around here," Delia explained. "He's got the bank, the sheriff, and half the town council in his pocket." Wade's jaw tightened. "I've dealt with his kind before. We'll stop the auction, clear your debts, and set things right." "You need rest first," Delia insisted, seeing how Wade struggled to keep his eyes open. "You're dead on your feet." Wade didn't argue as she led him to the spare room. He was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow, the journey having extracted its toll. Delia stood watching him for a moment, scarcely believing he was really there. The boy who had left was now a man, harder and more weathered, but with the same unwavering determination she had fallen in love with. Morning came with a sense of urgency. Wade was up at dawn, looking somewhat restored after a night's proper sleep, though the weariness of his long journey still clung to him. Over a breakfast of biscuits and coffee, they planned their approach to the auction. "Jefferson won't give up easily," Thomas warned. "He's got men all over town, and they're not above using force to get what they want." "Then we'll need to be smart," Wade replied. "I didn't ride all this way to lose in the final hour." They rode into town together, the gold secured in saddlebags distributed among them to avoid having everything in one place. Wade had cleaned up as best he could, but still looked like what he was, a man who had crossed half the country to keep his word. The auction was set to take place on the steps of the Sweetwater County Courthouse at noon. By 11, the street was crowded with spectators and bidders, though everyone knew who would be walking away with the Hawkins property. Randall Jefferson stood confidently near the front, surrounded by his men, his expensive Eastern suit making him stand out amid the more practical Western attire of those around him. Sheriff Wilson, a man whose allegiance had been bought for considerably less than his honor was worth, noticed their arrival first. Well, the Hawkins family come to watch their legacy change hands, and who might this be?" he asked, eyeing Wade suspiciously. "Wade Montgomery," Wade answered simply, offering no explanation. The name caused Jefferson to turn, his cold eyes appraising Wade with instant dislike. "Montgomery, the drifter who caused such a stir before leaving town with empty promises? I'm surprised you'd show your face here again." Wade met his gaze evenly. "I always keep my promises, Mr. Jefferson, just takes some longer than others." Jefferson's laugh was cold. "Well, you're just in time to see this one sold to someone who can make proper use of it. Unless, of course, the Hawkins family has miraculously found the $5,000 they owe the bank." "We have," Delia stated clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly hushed crowd. Jefferson's smile faltered momentarily before returning, more forced than before. "I find that hard to believe, Miss Hawkins. Your family has been scraping by for years." "Nevertheless," Thomas added, stepping forward with a heavy pouch, "we're prepared to settle our debts in full today." The bank manager, a nervous man named Perkins who had been standing nearby, looked uncertainly between the Hawkins family and Jefferson. "Well, if that's true, I suppose the auction would be unnecessary." Jefferson's face darkened. The auction was properly posted. "The law requires it proceed as scheduled." "The law requires no such thing," came a new voice. The crowd parted to reveal Judge Isaac Parker, known throughout the territory as the hanging judge for his strict application of justice. He had arrived unexpectedly from Fort Smith the previous evening. "If the debt can be satisfied, Mr. Perkins is well within his rights to cancel the proceedings." Jefferson's composure cracked slightly. "Your Honor, I wasn't aware you were in town." "Clearly," Parker replied dryly. "Now, let's see this matter settled according to the law, the actual law, not whatever interpretation has been convenient for certain parties." Under the judge's watchful eye, the bank manager verified the gold brought by the Hawkins family. The debt was paid in full with documentation provided to prove it. The auction was canceled, much to Jefferson's poorly concealed rage. As the crowd dispersed, Jefferson approached Wade, his voice low and threatening. "You've made a powerful enemy today, Montgomery. This isn't over." Wade met his gaze steadily. "For today, it is. Tomorrow's concerns can wait their turn." The ride back to the ranch was filled with a cautious optimism. They had won the first battle, but all of them knew Jefferson wasn't a man to accept defeat graciously. "We need to be on our guard," Thomas warned. "Jefferson has a long reach and a vindictive streak." Wade nodded in agreement. "First thing tomorrow, we start rebuilding what's been lost. The ranch needs hands, cattle, and repairs. I've got enough left to get things started." "Our pa built this place from nothing," Delia said. "We can do the same if we have to." As they approached the ranch house, a plume of smoke on the horizon sent a chill down Delia's spine. "Thomas, do you see that?" Her brother's face hardened. "Ride now." They urged their horses into a gallop, covering the remaining distance at breakneck speed. As they crested the final rise, the sight that greeted them confirmed their worst fears. The barn was ablaze, flames reaching high into the afternoon sky. Two of Jefferson's men were visible, trying to set fire to the main house as well. Seeing the returning riders, they mounted up quickly, firing a few shots to cover their retreat. Thomas and Wade returned fire, but the arsonists were already disappearing into the hills. Their immediate concern turned to saving what they could of the property. For hours they battled the blaze, joined by neighboring ranchers who had seen the smoke. By nightfall, the barn was a smoking ruin, but they had managed to save the house and most of the livestock. Exhausted and soot-covered, Wade found Delia sitting on the porch steps, staring at the destroyed barn with tears streaking clean lines down her dirt-smudged face. "We saved the house," he said gently, sitting beside her. "The barn can be rebuilt." "This is just the beginning," she replied, her voice hollow. "Jefferson won't stop until he has what he wants or until we're destroyed." Wade took her hand in his. "We're not destroyed yet, not by a long shot. I didn't cross half the country to give up at the first sign of trouble." She turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time since his return. The boy she had fallen in love with had been replaced by a man hardened by struggle and determination, yet his eyes held the same unwavering devotion. "Why did you come back, Wade?" "You could have started a new life anywhere with that gold." "Because I made a promise," he answered simply. "To your father, to you, and to myself. I said I'd come back when I could provide for you properly, and here I am, even knowing what we're facing." A smile touched his lips. "Especially knowing that. I didn't ride all this way to lose you to the likes of Randall Jefferson." Despite everything, Delia felt a smile forming in response. "You always were stubborn." "Had to be to love a Hawkins," he teased gently, then grew serious. "We'll get through this, Delia, together." The following days were a flurry of activity. Word of Jefferson's underhanded tactics had spread through the community, and many who had previously been intimidated into silence now came forward with their own stories. Judge Parker, still in town, began a formal investigation into Jefferson's business practices. Wade and Thomas focused on rebuilding the barn, while Delia nursed her father, whose condition had worsened after the excitement of the auction and fire. The old man was fading quickly, but seemed at peace knowing his daughter's future was secure and his land would remain in the family. One evening, as Wade was returning from town with supplies, he noticed a rider watching the ranch from a distant ridge. The figure disappeared as soon as Wade spotted him, but the message was clear. They were being watched. That night after dinner, Wade shared his concerns with Thomas. "We need to be prepared for trouble." Thomas nodded grimly. "Already am." "Got some of the neighboring ranchers keeping an eye out too. Jefferson's making enemies faster than he can count." "Still, I'd feel better if Delia and your father were somewhere safer until this is resolved." "Good luck convincing her of that," Thomas replied with a knowing look. "Stubborn as our pa, that one." As if summoned by their conversation, Delia joined them on the porch. "Convincing me of what?" Wade sighed, knowing there was no point in trying to soften his concerns. "I think Jefferson's planning something. It might be safer if you and your father went to stay in town for a while." "This is our home," Delia said firmly. "I'm not being driven from it by fear." "It's not just about fear," Wade argued. "It's about being smart. Jefferson's desperate and cornered. That makes him dangerous." "All the more reason not to show weakness," she countered. "Besides, Pa can't be moved. The doctor was clear about that yesterday." Wade knew she was right about her father. Samuel Hawkins was too frail to survive even a short journey to town. "Then we need to make sure this place is secure." "More men, more guns." "Already working on it," Thomas assured him. "Got 4 hands from the Peterson place coming tomorrow, and Judge Parker promised to send a deputy out to keep an eye on things." Despite these precautions, Wade slept lightly that night, his instincts honed by years of watching his own back in mining camps where claim jumping and theft were common. Shortly after midnight, a soft noise outside the window brought him fully awake. Moving silently, he took his revolver from the bedside table and crept to the window. In the moonlight, he could make out 2 figures approaching the house from the direction of the barn. They moved with the cautious precision of men trying not to be detected. Wade woke Thomas with a hand over his mouth and a warning finger to his lips. Wordlessly, he indicated the approaching threat. Thomas nodded, reaching for his own weapon. The brothers silently positioned themselves, Thomas at the front door, Wade at the side entrance that the intruders seemed to be targeting. The soft scrape of a boot on the porch steps was followed by the barely audible sound of a lock being picked. Wade waited until the door began to open before making his move, driving the butt of his revolver down hard on the first man's wrist. The intruder's gun clattered to the floor as he yelped in pain. The second man reacted quickly, firing a shot that splintered the doorframe inches from Wade's head. Thomas responded with a shot of his own from the front room, catching the second intruder in the shoulder and spinning him around. "Drop it," Wade commanded, his revolver now pointed squarely at the first man's chest. "Next one goes through your heart." The wounded intruder clutched his bleeding shoulder but kept his gun trained on Thomas. "You're dead, all of you," he snarled. "Jefferson's got 20 men ready to move in. This is just the start." "Might be the end for you," Thomas replied evenly. Judge Parker doesn't take kindly to attempted murder. The standoff was broken by Delia's appearance, shotgun in hand. "There's a third one trying to circle around back," she reported calmly. The momentary distraction was all the wounded man needed. He fired wildly at Thomas, who dove for cover, returning fire as he went. Wade tackled the first intruder, driving him to the floor as more shots erupted. When the brief, violent struggle ended, one of Jefferson's men lay dead, another seriously wounded, and the third had fled into the night. None of the Hawkins household was injured, though the house itself had taken several bullets. Sheriff Wilson arrived an hour later, his reluctance to investigate clear in his demeanor. "Looks like self-defense," he admitted grudgingly, unable to twist the facts with 3 witnesses and clear evidence of breaking and entering. "These men work for Jefferson," Wade stated flatly. "This was a deliberate attempt to silence us before Judge Parker's investigation goes any further." The sheriff avoided his gaze. "Can't prove that without evidence." "The surviving man can provide that evidence," Thomas pointed out, "unless he has an unfortunate accident while in your custody." Wilson flushed angrily. "Are you questioning my integrity, Hawkins?" "Merely observing that Jefferson's reach seems to extend into your office," Thomas replied calmly. "Judge Parker might be interested in that observation." The mention of the judge had its intended effect. Wilson straightened, suddenly more professional. "I'll see the prisoner gets proper medical attention and is held securely until the judge can question him." After the sheriff departed with the dead man's body and the wounded prisoner, the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table, the reality of their situation settling around them like dust after a storm. "Jefferson's getting desperate," Wade observed. "He knows the judge's investigation will expose him." "Makes him more dangerous," Thomas agreed. "We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Delia reached across the table to take Wade's hand. "I'm beginning to think you brought more than gold back with you, Wade Montgomery. You brought hope when we needed it most." Wade squeezed her hand gently. "Hope's a good start. Now we need a plan." The next morning brought unexpected news. Judge Parker arrived personally at the ranch, accompanied by 2 deputies and a grim expression. "Jefferson's gone," he announced without preamble. "Cleaned out his accounts and fled sometime during the night. Left his men to face the consequences alone." "Coward," Thomas muttered. "Typical," Wade added. "Men like that always run when cornered." Parker nodded in agreement. "He won't get far. I've telegraphed his description to every law enforcement office in 3 territories. But his organization is falling apart here already. Several of his men have turned evidence in exchange for leniency." "What does that mean for the ranchers who lost land to him?" Delia asked, thinking of their neighbors who had suffered similar tactics. "The courts will sort it out," Parker replied. "Those with legitimate grievances should see justice done, though it may take time." He turned to Wade. "Your testimony about similar operations in Colorado would be helpful, Mr. Montgomery. Seems Jefferson's been working both territories." Wade nodded. "I'll tell you everything I know, Your Honor." As the judge was leaving, he paused to look back at the 3 of them. "You've done this community a service by standing your ground. Not many would have had the courage." After he left, a sense of cautious optimism settled over the ranch. Jefferson's flight didn't mean an immediate end to their troubles. His organization still had roots in the territory, but it was a significant victory. That afternoon, as Wade and Thomas were clearing debris from the barn site to begin rebuilding, Delia came running from the house, her face pale with distress. "It's Pa," she said, her voice breaking. "The doctor says it won't be long now." They hurried inside to find Samuel Hawkins barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored. The doctor, who had been summoned earlier that morning, looked up at their entrance with a somber expression. "He's been holding on by sheer stubbornness," he told them quietly. But the body can only fight so long. Delia took her place at her father's bedside, holding his weathered hand between her own. Thomas stood at the foot of the bed, his expression stoic but his eyes betraying his grief. Wade remained in the doorway, feeling both part of and separate from this family moment. Samuel's eyes fluttered open, finding his daughter's face. "Delia," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm here, Pa," she answered, tears streaming down her face. "Montgomery, he here too." Wade stepped forward at the mention of his name. "Yes, sir, I'm here." A ghost of a smile touched the dying man's lips. "You kept your word, boy. Take care of her now." "With everything I am," Wade promised solemnly. Samuel's gaze shifted to his son. "Thomas, the land stays in the family." "Your mother would have wanted that." "It will, Pa, I swear it." Samuel seemed satisfied with this. His eyes closed, his breathing became more irregular, and within the hour he was gone, slipping away peacefully with his children at his side. The funeral was held 2 days later, attended by nearly everyone in the county. Samuel Hawkins had been a respected figure, one of the original pioneers who had helped establish the community. His passing marked the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new chapter for the ranch and his family. As summer turned to autumn, life at the Hawkins Ranch settled into a new rhythm. The barn was rebuilt, stronger than before. New cattle were purchased to replace those that had been lost or sold during the hard times. Hands were hired, and the daily work of a working ranch continued. Wade and Delia were married on a crisp October day, with Judge Parker returning to perform the ceremony. The judge brought news that Randall Jefferson had been captured in Kansas and would be returned to Wyoming to face multiple charges of fraud, intimidation, and conspiracy. "Justice catches up to everyone eventually," Parker noted after the ceremony. "Some just make us work harder for it." That evening, as the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Wade found his new wife standing on the porch, looking out at the land that had nearly been lost. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Montgomery?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Delia leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "Not a single one, just thinking about how close we came to losing all of this." "But we didn't," he reminded her, "and we won't." "Because you came back when everyone said you wouldn't." Wade turned her to face him, his expression serious. "I would have crawled back if I had to, Delia. There was never a question of if, only when." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the new lines that years of hardship had etched there. "I never stopped believing in you, even when others told me I was a fool." "Then you're the only fool I need," he replied with a smile, bending to kiss her as the last light of day painted the Wyoming sky in hues of gold and promise. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing with it deep snows and quiet evenings by the fire, Wade and Delia found themselves creating a home together, blending their dreams into a shared vision for the future. Thomas, who had initially been skeptical of Wade's return, had become his staunchest ally, the two men working side by side to restore the ranch to its former glory. News came in December that Jefferson had been convicted on all charges, sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. The corrupt officials who had aided him faced similar fates, while those who had lost land through his machinations began the long process of reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. "Seems like we've turned a corner," Thomas observed one evening as they sat around the kitchen table planning the spring cattle drive. "First year in a long while I'm actually looking forward to what comes next." "Speaking of what comes next," Delia said, a mysterious smile playing at her lips. "I have some news." She looked at Wade, her eyes shining. "We're going to have a baby sometime in June." Wade's expression transformed from surprise to joy in an instant. He swept Delia into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "A baby, are you sure?" "Doctor confirmed it yesterday," she laughed as he set her back down. "I wanted to be certain before I told you." Thomas grinned broadly, clapping Wade on the shoulder. "Congratulations, both of you. Pa would have been pleased." Later that night, as they lay in bed listening to the winter wind howl outside their snug home, Wade placed his hand gently on Delia's still flat stomach. "I can hardly believe it," he whispered. "After everything we've been through, it almost seems too good to be true." Delia covered his hand with her own. It's real, all of it. You made it real by coming back when everyone said you wouldn't. I would have crossed oceans for you, not just mountains and plains. I know, she murmured, nestling closer to him. That's why I waited. Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. Calves were born, fields planted, and Delia's pregnancy progressed, bringing with it a glow that Wade found irresistible. He caught himself watching her as she went about her daily tasks, marveling at the miracle growing within her. By late April, the ranch was thriving again. New hands had been hired, many of them men who had lost jobs when Jefferson's operation collapsed. The barn stood completed, the house had been repaired and expanded, and plans were underway for the summer cattle drive that would cement the ranch's return to prosperity. One evening, as Wade was returning from checking the north pasture, he spotted a rider approaching the ranch. Something about the man's posture seemed familiar, though Wade couldn't immediately place it. As the rider drew closer, recognition dawned, along with a cold dread that settled in his stomach. It was Frank Denton, one of Jefferson's most loyal lieutenants, a man who had escaped justice when his employer was arrested. Wade had testified against him in absentia, detailing Denton's role in the claim-jumping operation that had nearly cost Wade his life in Colorado. Wade urged his horse into a gallop, determined to intercept Denton before he reached the ranch house where Delia was alone, Thomas having ridden to town for supplies. Denton spotted him coming and reined in his horse, waiting. His hand hovered near his holster, but he made no move to draw, not yet. "Montgomery," he called as Wade approached. "Thought I might find you here." Wade stopped his horse a cautious distance away, his own hand ready to reach for his weapon if needed. "Denton, you're a long way from Colorado, and you're a long way from dead, which is a situation I've come to remedy." Denton's smile was cold. Jefferson may be in prison, but he still has friends who remember who put him there. "Jefferson put himself there," Wade replied evenly. "Same as you're doing now. Judge Parker's got a cell waiting for you." Denton's laugh was harsh. "I'm not planning on seeing the inside of any cell. You, on the other hand, won't be seeing much of anything after today." His hand moved toward his gun. Wade was faster, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. Denton's shot went wild as Wade's bullet found its mark, catching him in the chest. He toppled from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. The sound of gunfire brought Delia running from the house, her face pale with fear. "Wade, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," he assured her, dismounting and moving to her side. "But we need to alert the sheriff." This might not be an isolated incident. It wasn't. Over the next few weeks, 2 more of Jefferson's former associates made attempts on the ranch. One was captured by Thomas and the hands while trying to set fire to a storage shed. The other engaged in a shootout with Wade and a deputy who happened to be visiting, resulting in the would-be attacker's death. Sheriff Wilson, now firmly committed to upholding the law after Judge Parker's scrutiny of his office, increased patrols in the area and assigned a deputy to stay at the ranch until the threat passed. "Jefferson's reach is long, even from prison," the sheriff admitted. "But his resources are dwindling. Each failed attempt makes the next less likely." Despite the danger, life at the ranch continued. Delia, now in her 8th month of pregnancy, refused to be cowed by fear. "This is our home," she insisted when Wade suggested they might temporarily relocate to town. "Our child will be born here, not driven away by threats." Wade knew better than to argue. Instead, he focused on making the ranch as secure as possible, never going anywhere unarmed, always watchful for any sign of danger. June arrived with unseasonable heat, the sun beating down mercilessly on the parched land. Delia's time was near, and the midwife had taken up temporary residence at the ranch, ready for when the baby decided to make its appearance. It was on one of the hottest days of the month that Delia's labor began. Wade was checking irrigation ditches in the lower field when one of the hands came riding hard to find him. "It's time," was all the young cowboy needed to say. Wade rode back to the ranch at a gallop, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. By the time he arrived, Delia had been moved to their bedroom, the midwife already in attendance. "It's early yet," the older woman assured him. "First babies often take their time." But Delia's baby seemed determined to make a quick entrance into the world. By sunset, her labor had progressed rapidly, and the midwife shooed Wade from the room. "Go wait with your brother-in-law," she instructed. "I'll call you when there's news." Wade paced the front porch, unable to sit still, while Thomas watched with barely concealed amusement. "She's strong, Wade, stronger than both of us put together." "I know," Wade replied, his voice tight with worry, "but things can go wrong even for the strongest women." "Not Delia," Thomas said with certainty. "She's too stubborn to let childbirth get the better of her." The night deepened around them, stars appearing in a velvet sky. From inside the house came the sounds of Delia's labor, each cry cutting Wade to the quick with his inability to ease her pain. Finally, shortly after midnight, a new sound pierced the night, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Wade froze mid-pace. His heart seemed to stop and then restart with a thunderous beat. The midwife appeared at the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a daughter, Mr. Montgomery, a beautiful, healthy girl." Wade entered the bedroom on unsteady legs to find Delia propped against pillows, her face glowing despite her exhaustion, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile radiant. "Meet your daughter," she said softly, shifting the blanket to reveal a tiny face with a shock of dark hair. Wade sank to his knees beside the bed, overcome with emotion. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's cheek with one finger. "Just like her mother." "We should name her after your mother," Delia suggested. "Sarah, wasn't it?" Wade nodded, too choked with emotion to speak immediately. His mother had died when he was young, but her memory had been a guiding star throughout his life. "Sarah it is," he finally managed. "Sarah Hawkins Montgomery." As if recognizing her name, the baby opened her eyes, revealing irises of deepest blue. Wade felt his heart expand with a love so profound, it almost hurt love for this tiny new life and for the woman who had given her to him. "Thank you," he said to Delia, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips. "For what? For waiting. For believing I'd come back when everyone said I wouldn't." Delia's free hand came up to cup his cheek. "I never doubted you, Wade, not really. Even in my darkest moments, something in me knew you'd return." The weeks that followed were a blur of joy and adjustment as they settled into life with their new daughter. Sarah proved to be a good-natured baby, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Word came from Judge Parker that the last of Jefferson's known associates had been captured or killed, ending the immediate threat to the ranch. The judge himself visited in late July, bringing news that Jefferson had died in prison, the victim of an outbreak of influenza that had swept through the facility. "Seems justice comes in many forms," the judge observed as he admired baby Sarah. "This little one represents the best kind, new life and new beginnings emerging from troubled times." By autumn, the ranch had fully recovered from the trials of the previous years. The cattle drive had been successful, bringing in enough money to ensure their security for the foreseeable future. New buildings had been erected, old ones repaired, and plans made for expansion in the coming year. On the first anniversary of Wade's return, he and Delia stood on the porch as the sun set, their daughter asleep in her mother's arms. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Delia remarked, watching as the last light gilded the distant mountains. "Hardest and best year of my life," Wade replied, his arm around her shoulders. "Though I'm hoping for less excitement in the next one." Delia laughed softly. "With a child who has Montgomery blood, I wouldn't count on it," Wade smiled, acknowledging the truth in her words. "Fair point, but whatever comes, we'll face it together." "Just like we have from the beginning," she agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. As darkness settled over the Wyoming Territory, Wade Montgomery reflected on the journey that had brought him here from a penniless cowboy with nothing but dreams and determination to a man with land, wealth, and most importantly, a family he would cross any distance to protect. "They said you'd never come," Delia had told him that first day, her voice holding both accusation and hope. "Then they don't know how far I'd ride," had been his simple answer. It was true then, and even more true now. For Delia, for Sarah, for the home they had built together, there was no distance he wouldn't cross, no obstacle he wouldn't overcome. In a land where a man's word was his bond, Wade Montgomery had kept his promise in the face of overwhelming odds. And as he stood there with his family in the gathering dusk, he silently renewed that promise. To love, to protect, to remain faithful no matter what challenges the future might hold. In the untamed wilderness of the Wyoming Territory, where life was harsh and often brief, Wade and Delia Montgomery had found something rare and precious, a love worth riding any distance for, worth fighting any battle to preserve. The years that followed brought both joys and sorrows, as all years do. Sarah grew from an infant to a curious toddler, then a spirited young girl with her father's love of horses and her mother's quiet determination. She was joined by a brother, Samuel, named for his grandfather, and later by twin girls, Emma and Rose. The ranch prospered, expanding its boundaries and its operations. Wade and Thomas worked side by side, turning the Hawkins legacy into one of the most successful ranching operations in the territory. They weathered drought and blizzard, market fluctuations, and the continuing encroachment of civilization as Wyoming moved toward statehood. Through it all, Wade and Delia remained each other's anchors, their love deepening with each passing year, each challenge faced and overcome together. The story of the cowboy who rode 17 days straight to keep his promise became legend in the region, told and retold around campfires and in saloons, embellished with each telling until Wade hardly recognized himself in the tales. But Delia knew the truth of it, as did Wade. It wasn't just about the distance traveled, the gold carried, or the enemies faced. It was about a promise kept, a love honored, and the knowledge that some things are worth any journey, no matter how long or arduous. And in the end, that was more than enough for a life well lived in the vast, beautiful, unforgiving landscape of the American West.